John 17:17 says God's word is truth. Not the truth, it is truth. So truth is whatever God says. Well, we're going to take a look today at a family that Jesus uses as an example of a number of things. And Luke chapter 15 is going to tell us a little bit about this family. But before we get into the family, I want to give you a little background because it's important to understand what Jesus is telling us about this story. And it's a parable, of course. So we're going to go to verse 1. Because there's a series of parables in here, and we're just going to read through one of them. Then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him. Isn't that interesting? I was reading over that yesterday, and it struck me. All the tax collectors, they weren't the highly respected people. They were hated. Why? Because the tax collectors were Jews that were working for the government, for the man. They were collecting for the Roman government, and they made their income because they were authorized to collect whatever they could get. And whatever was owed to the government, they paid to the government. Whatever they could collect beyond that, they kept for themselves. So they were hated because they were gouging their own people. They were also hated because they were serving the government that the people hated that was oppressing them. So they were hated for at least two reasons. So being a tax collector was even worse than being an IRS agent to us today. And if one of you is an IRS agent, bless you, you work for the government. Thank you, because we need you to collect the money. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to enjoy some of the things that we enjoy. But it was very different in those days. And the sinners, they loved to be around him and listen to him. Wow. The sinners, the prostitutes, the thieves, the liars, those that were cheating on their husband or their wife, those that were the dregs of society, not just in people's eyes, but even violating God's word, they loved to be around Jesus. Wow. Let that sink in a little bit. Why? What was there about him that they loved being around, and not just being around him, but they loved listening to what he has to say? Now let's kind of fast forward to today, because the Bible says we are the body of Christ in the earth today. So we are Christ in the earth today. And the question is, do the sinners still love drawing near to his body and listening to what his body has to say? They drew near to him, they loved being around him, and they loved listening to him, but I strongly suspect they don't love being around the church and listening to what we have to say. I know that because this place would be filled. It would be filled, and they'd be waiting in the parking lot to get into the next service, and we'd probably have to have multiple services beyond the two that we have today. If somehow, when they heard us, when they were around us, they felt the way they did when they were around Jesus. It's not because they're any worse today. It's not because of the sinners. It's got to be something about us. And yet we are his body in the earth today. Somewhere there's something that he was doing or he had that we may have, but we don't recognize it, or we're not doing it. And so Jesus began to tell stories. And he tells 3 stories. The first story is about a shepherd who has 100 sheep. And he realizes when he does a count one day, there are only 99 of them. One of them's missing. And he leaves those 99 until he finds the one sheep that was lost. Now think about that. From a business point of view, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Because if you leave the 99, because they're sheep, if you leave the 99 that are here to go find the one that's lost, you may lose some more of the 99. They may wander off or something may come in. So it makes much more sense to say, all right, I've lost one of them, but I still got 99. So that's my business is 99% successful. That's pretty good. So we'll let the one go because I can't take the risk of going to track him down. I've got to keep what I have. Then he tells a story about a woman who has some coins, and she loses one of them and tears the whole house up trying to find that one coin that was lost. I mean, she's probably a woman that likes everything just where it is. She likes everything just stacked the right way, everything, and she tears the house apart to find this one lost coin. And then he moves into the story that we're going to talk about this morning. So we'll read this story together, and then we'll go through it. Story you're all familiar with, I'm sure. Start in verse 11. Then he said, a certain man had 2 sons. Don't forget, it's 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, give me the portion of the goods that fall to me. So he divided them. He divided to them his livelihood, or their inheritance. And not many days after that, the younger son gathered all together that he'd been given and journeyed to a far country, and there he wasted his possessions with wasteful or prodigal living, the New King James says. But when he'd spent all of it, there arose a great famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And when he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. Now, this is a Jew going to feed pigs, because a pig was untouchable to them. This is very demeaning, very humiliating. And he's out there, it says in verse 16, he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods or the cobs that the swine were eating, but nobody gave him even those. He's now at a point where he's so desperate, he would compete with the pigs for their food, but they didn't even give him that. Verse 17, but when he came to himself, and we'll look at that later, he said, wait a minute, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare? And I perish with hunger. I know what I'll do. I will rise and go to my father and will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he's got his plan worked out. So he gets up and he comes to his father. Came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand, sandals on his feet, bring the fatted calf here, kill it, let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and he's now alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry. But now his older son was out in the field. And he came and drew near to the house, and he heard the music and the dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked them, what do these things mean? And he said to him, your brother has come, because he's received him safe and sound. Your father has killed the fatted calf, which was a specially reserved animal for special occasions. And the older son was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I've been serving you, and I never transgressed your commandments at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I may make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood and with harlots, and you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you're always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost, and he's found. This is a story of a family of a father and his two sons. So we're going to walk through this a little bit. This son, who's obviously the younger son. Now, just to understand in those days that when a father died, his inheritance generally was not spread equally among his sons. There was a law that carried over even into England called the law of autoprimogeniture, which basically means that the oldest son inherits most of it. In fact, in England, it was 2/3 to 1/3, and then it was even other issues that it could be broke down. And we don't need to get into that this morning. But the point is, the oldest son basically inherited the majority of it. And so this younger son grows up and begins to develop an attitude. Now understand this, and I've seen this happen in other generations, where you have a father who's earned it. Now, we don't know where he got it from, but we assume the father owns everything. He's earned all this, and these young boys are grown up under a father who is obviously very wealthy, has lots of possessions, and so they grow up not having to earn what they wear, not having to earn the food that they're eating, not having to earn the car they drive, not having to earn the credit card that they have, not having to earn the things that they get to enjoy. They just have them because their father earned them. And the father lets the children enjoy all these things. And what begins to happen in this young son, and actually we see it in the older son, is they begin to feel entitled to something that's a gift. And if you are entitled to something and you get it, it's no longer a gift. A gift is something that's freely given, not something that's earned. That's what Romans 4 talks about. This talks about our salvation is a gift from God. It's not like wages, which is something that you earn and you're entitled to. And the way you know that you feel you're entitled to something is you get upset when you don't get it. So when you don't get what you think you're entitled to, you begin to get upset. You begin to get resentful. You begin to get envious of others that have it. You begin to get jealous. And this is what's going on here. This younger son is beginning to think somehow he's entitled to something. And because of that, he decides to do what he wants to do with it. So he chooses to take what he thinks he's entitled to and go out on his own and live his own life his own way. And he went out there. He never earned this, so he didn't have a value of it. He never learned the skill of what it takes to earn it. He'd only learned the skill of what it takes to spend it. And he goes out there and he burns through the entire inheritance. And while he's spending the inheritance, it's at a time of great prosperity in the land. Things are going well. So he's very confident because most likely that's all he's ever known. He's just known good times. He's just known when the stock market's going up and interest rates on the bank are going up and interest rates on loans are going down. Of course, that doesn't happen that way, but that's all he knew. He just knew it's good times. Time to enjoy myself, prove who I am. And because he's young, he'd never been through a hard time. He'd never been tested. And about the time he's blown through the inheritance, the economy turns around. And jobs dry up. And food begins to become scarce. And there's a famine in the land. And now he comes face to face with what he's done. He's come face to face with the thing he put his trust in, which he didn't really understand, has now run out. And now he's got to decide what he's going to do. So the first thing he does is figure out how he can solve his own mess, how he can take care of himself. See, there's still self at the root of this. I'm going to prove my own way. I'm going to decide. I'm going to prove what I'm capable of. I'm going to go out and I'm going to walk into my destiny that I'm going to make for myself. And now it's gone south. It's gone sour. Things haven't turned out the way. So what he's going to do is he's going to take the mess he has now and he's going to solve it himself. And he's going to go out there and he finds a job. And the only job he can find is with a pig farmer. And because of who he is, that he doesn't have any training, he doesn't have any skills, he's assigned to the lowest job, is to slop the pigs. Again, for a Jew, a horribly demeaning thing. Nobody would help him. Nobody cared about him, even at his lowest point. Well, almost nobody. Almost nobody. And you know, it's a nice story so far, but that's where we've been. Say, wait a minute, I'm not out slopping pigs. Wait a minute, I haven't taken my father's inheritance and walked around. Oh, yes, you have. Because the life that's in you, you didn't earn. The breath you breathe every few seconds, you didn't earn. The life that was conceived in your mother's womb, you had nothing to do with. It was a gift from God entrusted to you so that you would take that life that he gave you and use it to honor him, to serve him, and to love him. But each of us took that gift that God gave us, whether you were young or older, and we left that opportunity and went out on our own to make our own way, to live our own life the way we wanted to live it, to make our life our mark in the world. The next verse, we skipped some in telling the story, is so important. It's so telling. Verse 17. It says, and when he came to himself. Some translations say, when he came to his senses. Sometimes in life, it takes a moment when your eyes get opened and you realize how low you've gotten. Sometimes it takes a moment. Something has to dawn on us when we realize where we are, when we realize what we've done. In the Bible, that's called conviction. It's awakening up and realize, what have I done? Where am I? I thought I could do this, and look what I did. I got myself starving in pig slop, trying to talk a pig into feeding me what he's got in his mouth. But he came to his senses. Sometimes it takes something in our senses to wake us up. Sometimes when you have somebody that's an alcoholic or they're hooked on drugs, they will never come out of it until they hit bottom, until they end up in the pig slop, until they realize what they have done. Because the root of all addictions, the root of all, whether it's alcohol or drugs or pornography, the root of all of that is a deception. The deception that somehow I can control this. If you ever talk to an alcoholic, they'll say, oh no, I can stop drinking if I want to. I can stop doing this if I want to. I can stop doing this if I want to, and that makes them feel better. And so they'll associate with other people that are like them because they make each other feel better. And the only way they're ever going to get out of that is to come to their senses. Their senses. Literally, sometimes it takes an intervention by the family where you sit down with them and you don't give them any way out. Because when you're deceived, we're full of excuses and rationales. Ultimately, it's not my fault. It's because my wife nags me, or my husband's not doing this, or it's because I did this. It's my situation in life. All of these things become excuses for why I do what I do, when in reality, I've chosen to get into that, and now I can't get myself out. And it takes something to dawn on our senses that I can't control this anymore. It's out of my control, and that's when the door opens for help. And you may be sitting out there and saying, I'm not an alcoholic, I've never been hooked on drugs, I'm not into pornography, and there may be some of you out there that are in one or more of those things. But you can say, but I'm not hooked on anything. Yes, you were. Sin. sin. Just stop sinning and find out how much control you have. Never, ever. Read through the Sermon on the Mount. And then at the end of that say, I will never do any of that ever again. And watch what happens. Because the harder you try not to, the more you'll do it. Because you can't overcome it in yourself. And why? Because we walked away from God, and the root of all sin, and we'll get into this as we get further into the gospel. Most of what you and I consider sins are the fruit of sin. It's not the sin itself. Sin itself is not lying, it's not stealing, it's not adultery. Those are sins. But that's not the root of sin. The root of sin is self. And you go back to, I think it's in Isaiah, or Ezekiel, I forget which one, where he talks about Lucifer when he rebelled against God. I will make myself like the Most High. I will ascend to heaven. In 3 verses, the first pronoun I is at least 6 times. I will do this. I will make myself. I will make myself. So the root of all sin is exactly what this younger brother did. I'm going to take what's mine, what I'm entitled to, what was entrusted to me, and I'm going to make what I want out of my life. So he gets up. I don't even know if he cleans up. And he starts heading back home. That's the first right step he's made. Now look at what happens. Because we're going to shift attention now from the younger son to the father. Verse 20. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him. Stop there. In order for his father to see him a great way off, he has to be looking. Now understand, in that culture, for a father to go out looking for a son was completely contrary to their culture, because the father was the one that was honored. The father was the one that they would come to. The father was the one that father would never do that according to their custom. But the father's not concerned with culture. This father's not concerned with custom. He's not concerned with what anybody else thinks. He just knows one thing: his boy's out there. He doesn't care what the rest of the clan thinks. He's out there probably every day looking at the horizon, waiting. Notice he didn't go out and get him, because it wouldn't have done any good to go drag him and bring him back home, because the desire to fulfill himself would still be in him. And eventually, when he got his stomach full and began to feel better, whether he physically went out there or not, his heart would go back out there. He had to come to the end of himself. And when he did, now he was ready to receive what his father had for him. And he made the right choice. He began to come home. And the father's looking, waiting. No reason to believe any particular day that he would see him. But he doesn't care. He continues to look. He's looking at the horizon, and he sees this thing. You know, and when you look at in the summertime out over a field, and you see the effect of the heat, and it begins to wavy lines out there, and you can have mirages of things. And he sees this, and doesn't get any closer. It's not him. Day after day, he goes out, and then this one day, he's looking. Do you know how much patience that must take? We don't know how long it was, but it had to be long enough for the economy to turn around. It had to be long enough for him to get this job, to get tired of this job, get so hungry that he wouldn't stay where he was. So it has taken some period of time. And the father's out there every day looking. Yes, things are well at home. Yes, everything's fine, but it's not right, because that son's still out there. And he's looking. And this day, he sees something, says, I wonder if it's that mirage again. But wait a minute. It's getting larger. Wait a minute. It's getting nearer. Wait a minute, I recognize that walk, I think. Is that it? Yes. Notice what it says. While the boy was still a long way off, look what happened. The father had compassion. Had compassion. What motivates the father in this whole story is right there. It's the compassion for that son, the love for that son. And notice what he does. When he saw him, he felt compassion and he ran. Our father, the head of a household, would never do that. It was undignified. And to run with those robes, he would either have to take the outer robes off or tie them up. They called girding their loins. They would pull it up between their legs and tie it on their belt so that they could run fast. That was very demeaning. That was not the kind of thing that the head of a household would do. But he didn't care what people thought. He didn't care what it looked like to anybody else. That was his boy, and he couldn't wait till he got here. He had to run out and meet him. He ran. And when he saw him, he threw his arms around his neck and hugged him.